posted on our YouTube page. So you can go back there and watch it again or pass the link along and have someone else, if there's someone else that might have some interest in it, they can watch it also. Um, and just some other background, please keep your microphones muted and your cameras off. It helps with the bandwidth. And if you've been with us in the past, you guys have been doing an excellent job with that. So we do thank you for that. Our speaker today is Brandi Keller. She is our Master Gardener Program Coordinator, and she is going to be speaking on holiday plant care. We do have two more talks for this year. When we come back after the holidays, this time next week, everyone will be getting ready to have some turkey. Amanda Cripple will be speaking on food preservation. And then on the 10th, it's going to be an open forum. You're going to have the opportunity to pose questions to the agents, and we will hopefully help you guys out with any issues that you might be having. So we're looking forward to that because it's something different that we haven't done before with this program. So with that said, I am going to turn it over to Brandi, and she is going to speak on holiday plant care. Brandi, it's all yours.
All right. Thank you, Paul. Wow, we've been doing this since May, and for some reason, I just have little butterflies in me today. I'm so nervous. I don't know why. Um, but again, thanks, Paul. Hello, everyone. Um, I think this is going to be just a really fun talk, mainly because there's just so many pretty pictures in here. And right now, I think you'll agree that we could all use just more pictures of pretty flowers. Um, so again, I'm Brandi Keller. This is coming from our Harris County office, Texas A&M AgriLife Extension, and I'll be talking about holiday plant care. All right, so I will be covering 6 plants today, even though there's probably quite a bit more that you can choose from when you're out and about. And all of these can really be found at any nursery, grocery store, big box store. They're going to be just about anywhere now. So they're very easy to find. So we're going to just jump right into the most popular option, the poinsettia. So of course it comes in just so many different colors now. Even, you see the red, pink, white on the screen. There's variations in between, speckled. So there's just some really stunning colors that we can purchase now. And when you buy more than one, when they're grouped together, they really do make a really big impact. So when you're first looking to buy your poinsettia, just really look it over to make sure that it seems healthy. Right now, all those plants are going to be really fresh. If you go to buy one right before Christmas, it might be a little on the worn side. But just look it over, see if the leaves look, nice and, healthy and firm, and that there's flowers. And just in general, I think you'll be able to tell. Uh, I think the longer they sit in stores, the more stress they're put under. For water, it really does not require a lot of watering. Overwatering will definitely kill this plant. So you want to be sure that it's draining properly. Even though they come in those really beautiful plastic sleeves, sometimes that's the downfall right there, because we think, well, you know what, it's beautiful, it's got a lovely design on it, but it can also catch the water. But then that allows that plant to sit in water, and we really don't want that. So really, we recommend that you take it out of those sleeves and then just be sure that the pot that it's in does drain. But with these plants, they usually are in pots that drain. You don't have to fertilize it, and definitely avoid drafts. these plants are really sensitive really to the extremes, so cold or heat. So, if you're somewhere where it does get colder than Houston, avoid those drafts, or even like a vent that has like a lot of high heat coming out of it. So when we look a little closer at this plant, you can see that the part that really creates a lot of excitement uh, isn't even a flower. They're actually leaves. And these modified leaves are called bracts. And there's a number of plants that have a really colorful leaf that I think from afar we interpret as a flower. But those are just the leaves. But that's exactly why we get them, because they're so beautiful. The flowers are actually down in the center. They're just small, kind of inconspicuous. Uh, you're definitely not buying the plant for the flower. But when you're purchasing these plants, you can take a look at this, and you can see the one on the bottom right, how it's unopened. So buy ones that are unopened, or that look like they were just, that they just opened. If they look like those flowers are really spent and they're getting ready to fall apart, then you know that that plant is older, and so you're not going to get a whole lot of really great, time out of it. And along with those drafts, if it does go through a big temperature change, sometimes those leaves will turn yellow and drop. So that's why you want to watch for that. So after the holidays, so these plants are really, they really are meant to be disposable in a way, thrown away after the season. And part of that is because the maintenance required to get them to bloom just sometimes is more than, the average person really wants to deal with. And even if it does bloom, it just really won't look as good as when you bought it. And this picture, I think this shows a good example of what it might look, if you were able to get it to bloom again. But right after the holidays, after, it looks like those flowers are spent and it's starting to, look a little worse, for the wear, stop watering. And that's going to allow those bracts to start falling off, and it's going to send it into a dormant period. This is probably one of the more challenging parts because, we just see those red bracts, we keep watering it, and it's like, well, we'll just let it go as long as possible. But it really should go into that dormant period if you want to try to, keep it and grow it next year. And then keep around 60 to 70 degrees. That could be in somewhere in the house, maybe not out in the open in the garage. Here in Houston, maybe outside, um, but just somewhere where it can just kind of take a rest. If you do want to chance it and try to get it to bloom again, uh, in about March, you want to repot it, not into a pot that's a lot bigger, just 1 or 2 steps up. Commercial potting mix, start watering again, um, and let it sit in a sunny spot until it starts growing. And once it starts growing, you'll want to prune it. I'm not going to go into all the details. Julie will post a fact sheet, I think right now, that we have on our website on how to get these to rebloom. And then in general, you just move back out after frost, avoid full sun. You can plant them in Houston. You can plant them outdoors here after any chance of frost. But it just probably will not bloom at Christmas time, because when it's inside, you can force that darkness a little bit earlier. And these plants do bloom with longer nights, so that darkness really initiates the blooming sequence. And then once they come back in after, after you've had them wherever, just kind of maintaining them in order to get them to bloom, that darkness does need to be 12 to 15 hours every night for 10 weeks. So that's what I'm saying. You know, if you think about every night you have to put it in the closet, and then every day you put it back out, because during the day you still want it to be in, you know, a good amount of sunny light. So that's just the short of it, definitely. Some fun facts about poinsettias. They are the highest selling potted flowering plant, and that might not seem like a big deal, but when you think about the very short amount of time that they are being sold, that's kind of impressive. And Texas is definitely a major producer of commercially grown poinsettias. The latex sap. So when they are cut, or even if they're bumped, that can happen too. A leaf will come off. They will release that latex sap, and it's you know, it's real milky and white, um, really identifiable. But the purpose of that sap is really, it's a deterrent for predators. You know, if they want to chomp on it, then they'll get some of this sap, and that sap is just mildly toxic. But eventually, you know, that sap will dry up and it'll create kind of a protective coating. And, you know, you might see it and want to, like, you know, kind of rub it off or whatever, but keep it there because it's protecting it from disease and other insects. And despite what I just said about that sap being mildly toxic, the plant itself is actually not poisonous. That's probably one of the biggest misconceptions. Uh, there's a study that is typically used, you know, when people are talking about poinsettias, saying that for a small child, you know, that small child would need to eat 500 to 600 leaves before there's an issue. Um, my question there is more, who is this kid? I mean, who's that test subject? But even though they're not poisonous, they're really not edible either. So don't look at that as an invitation to, you know, make a pan of poinsettia leaves. Uh, to the right, it says December 12th is the plant's official day, and that does coincide with its namesake and the day that that person died, Joel Roberts Poinsett. All right, rosemary. Um, and I'll probably take some questions if there are any after this one. But rosemary, they are just really a great gift because, I mean, it's lovely, it smells lovely, and then of course it's an herb that can actually be used. Um, so that's the only plant on our list that it has that function. These are really hard to grow indoors. You know, these topiaries have been cared for inside of a greenhouse for months under the most ideal conditions and with probably fabulous light. So once we purchase them, even them going into the store, they're probably experiencing a little bit of stress. And then once we take them back home and that light is decreased even more, that's probably one of the bigger issues with this particular plant. Um, Other than that, watering is something to really watch for too, because you know, they like to dry out between. And again, you can see in this picture and some of the others that they also come in a protective, you know, wrapping. And so again, someone may keep that on thinking that it's really useful, but it's actually going to harm the plant more than help it. And just be sure that there's drainage holes. Even though it likes to be dry, the irony is that the plant actually likes a little bit of humidity. So one of the really low maintenance tricks that you can do to help that is a tray that you put it in. You can fill it up with some pebbles, uh, fill it up a little bit with water. You don't want the water to go over the pebbles, obviously, and then just set the plant on top of that. And that'll provide some added humidity, especially in the winter when more north, your heat's really going to be kicking and it really dries out the air. And then you can also spritz it too. Let's see, water, drainage, and bright light. Definitely bright light. You know, you're most likely going to bring this home, and I hope that you're going to put it more towards a window. Um, so that way it does have a little bit more light. If it is a smaller window and you know, you're not getting like full coverage around that plant, you want to be sure to turn it because you'll notice that the growth will just start coming out on the one side that's facing the window. So if you turn it and just rotate it, it can have a little bit of even growth there. And the only other comment I'll make, especially about this particular picture, is that you know that it's really dense, and that's also part of the appeal. You know, it makes it look like a really successful topiary, but that is also the downfall too, because it really lacks like really good airflow. So if you are going to use this plant, don't be afraid to just not only clip the outside, but maybe down in it, so it actually opens it up. Having some air down in there is not going to be a bad thing. Um, and I think Julie has a link for the rosemary too that she will post. So after the holidays, well, you know, let's start first with it. It does one of the reasons why a rosemary's you'll find as a topiary is that it does respond really well to pruning. Uh, the problem is that I think the general population it's not likely that we're going to maintain it. I'm not saying that it can't be done. It just takes a certain level of care. After the holidays, I think it should just go outside. It's really not unless you have, you know, really bright conditions or a special space for plants. I think it's just best to take it outside. They just don't do as well indoors. Uh, you want to, and well, the other thing is that when you buy them, they're usually really pot bound. So then the next step is you'd want to pot it up into a bigger pot or even outside in the ground. Here in Houston, we can do that. Other places, if you're joining from somewhere else, you're not necessarily going to be able to do that. You can just pot it up. But here in Houston, it is an evergreen perennial. It's good between zones 8 and 10. We see them all over the place. One of the advantages of this particular plant is that it can actually be planted as, you know, a foundation plant or, you know, an interesting shrub in your garden. So plant outside, repot plants, and then of course, really full sun. And if you are going to transplant it, just be sure that you do it well after a frost, even here in Houston, because well-established plants are going to handle those low temperatures a lot better than, you know, than brand new plants. And I think the link that Julie put in, it actually it goes, I think it might be Aggie Hort, but it also has a Spanish version too, if you're interested. All right, I think I skipped the one question, but are there any questions, Paul? No questions?
Uh,
None that I've
um,
seen, Brandi.
Okay.
Claudia,
Somebody was just making a comment about actual rosemary blooming. They didn't know that it actually bloomed.
Oh yeah. So, you know, I try to remember everything to say. I skip over some of it, but yeah, these blooms, they're actually one of my favorite flowers just because they're so delicate and so small. Um, and, you know, depending on how much sun it's in, it could really be covered in a lot of blooms. With a little less sun, you're going to have less. But yeah, they're really beautiful. All right. Anything else? All right. Oh, and I have the fun fact. So I'm trying to add about 3 of these in with each plant. So this one it is part of the mint family, and that's along with basil, lavender, and oregano. The origin of the name rosmarinus means dew of the sea. Well, these are from the Mediterranean. They're along the water. There's a lot of mist. So, they just kind of, noticed that a lot of rosemary was always covered in mist. So that was something I didn't know. And rosemary is a symbol of remembrance. They even used to, after someone had passed away, they would, you know, provide a little bouquet with them and put that in their hands. But in general, I think if you have a history with plants, with herbs, rosemary really is one of those that plays a lot with our memories, especially with family. I know I have that. Cyclamen. Oh, the video is working. I'm so excited. I wasn't sure if it was going to work. Look at that. Oh, okay. I have to talk. So cyclamen, these are obviously really striking flowers, with these plants where the flowers are actually really super elevated above those leaves. There's so many different colors, pinks, fuchsias, white, lavender, a little bit lavender. But let's not forget the foliage either. I mean, that foliage is really striking also. They're mostly heart-shaped leaves, and you can see those pictures. There's a really nice contrast between like that dull green, but then that frost color. And there's a lot of different patterns that come on those leaves depending on the type that you get. So really everything about this plant is just super charming. So going back to the video that you saw it opening, you'll notice that this flower is upside down. They hang like any other bud, as you saw when it started. And then, they open, but then they overextend and then they go all the way up, which really leaves those reproductive parts underneath facing down, and that's because it really protects them from the rainfall. Well, where they're from. There's no rainfall in our house, hopefully. The other really great thing about these plants is that they are really prolific bloomers until about April. So when you're purchasing these, definitely take a look and try to get ones that that have a lot of blooms. This is another one. Uh, three out of three so far. Water only when dry. Um, so just like the other two, of course you don't want to go to the other extreme, but don't overwater. Uh, but these, in contrast to the other two, they actually prefer cool temperatures. Their normal dormant period is actually during the summer. So they prefer cool temps, full sun, and they do still like humidity though. So that tray pebble idea would be helpful. And then watering from the bottom. I would also water that rosemary from the bottom. Get a bowl full of water, something a little bit bigger, just set it down in. I usually let it soak there for, an hour, 2 hours if I've forgotten. And then you let that, just the soil absorb, and it's not really interfering with the leaves. So, oh, that was just the best, wasn't it? That video. Oh, um, so, okay, before we talk about really after the holidays, I just wanted to show you what this looks like under the soil. So these are actually tubers that are a little bit flattened, and so they're not planted real deeply. And I'm not sure what else. Let me see what else. Oh, the only other thing too is not really talking about your plant after the holidays, but they do sell these in the nurseries just for winter color, like out, like you would buy snapdragons, ornamental cabbage, things like that. And then of course, once that season ends, you just pull them up. And of course, these will make a really big impact together. But for your particular plant, after the holidays, I just recommend keeping it um, as a house plant. So obviously this is going to go well past the coming holidays, in December and New Year's. So these will bloom till about April. So you have these for quite a while. Again, let dry between watering. Uh, and once they are done flowering, you can let that dry period go a little bit longer. And be sure that you don't put them in really super bright light, you know. And okay, so here's the thing with these plants after the fact. Um, so they can stay outside after their leaves have dropped. After they're done blooming, their leaves are going to start dropping. That's when you're going to start restricting that water. And once those leaves have dropped, you can just store those tubers like somewhere dry and vermiculite or something for about 6 to 12 weeks. So, there's a good dormant period. And if you have them outside, if you really want to, you can dig them up and do the same thing. I just don't know if it's, it's a little high maintenance. And then you can eventually repot them in well-drained soil, just keeping that tuber, as you saw, a little bit above the soil. This plant really is marketed to be a little bit disposable because it's hard to get it to bloom really nicely, later on. Fun facts. So the flower stalk, because that flower stalk is so long, when it dries, it kind of dries down into a spiral, and then it falls close to the ground or on the ground, and then that's where that fruit is formed. And that fruit can actually develop 6 to 12 viable seeds. Uh, we might not know this because we are just compulsive deadheaders, right? Or I don't know, if you're not, I am. So if you do let these go to seed, they're good seeds. Yeah, it's just when you do deadhead them, especially towards the beginning of their blooming, it does help the plant, but it would be interesting to leave some of them. Unlike the poinsettia, any part of this plant is toxic to animals. So if you have it in the house, watch, for your cats. Dogs outside, you just want to be sure that they're not, they're not trying to chew on the tubers for the naughty dogs out there. Norfolk pine. So this is a really good alternative as a living tree. This is kind of a departure from, the other plants because it really is, it's from Australia and it can grow up to 200 feet tall. So this is naturally a very tall tree. So definitely a departure. And these also really aren't meant to live a whole long time. I think they, the producers intend us to buy them every year at Christmas. But we don't have to. But we'll talk about that in a minute. So they are evergreen conifer. In the house, they'll get about 4 to 6 feet tall. With these, you do want to keep the soil damp, not wet, just damp, and bright to indirect light. These really do not like to dry out like the other ones do, but they do like what? What are all the other ones like? Humidity. So, you can spritz this one too. So, bright light, loves windows. If you do put it by, a a small window or no windows, those branches, the whole thing can just kind of thin out. It, it needs a little bit brighter light to be a little bit more full. And the other interesting thing about this plant is that if you have a piece that has gone brown and you trim it and you prune it, you're not going to get green growth back from that. I just wanted to show this picture. I don't have a lot to say about it, just to show how cool these branches, they just develop like in this horizontal fashion. And especially with that new growth, it's so bright green. Really, really different. All right, so where do I start here? So I'll start with the picture. So the photo on the right is really what we would be buying at the store and growing. The photo on the right is obviously, a mature tree. I think it's really interesting that when it's young, obviously, even with the photo before it, back here, how those limbs droop down. But as it matures, they go the other way. Um, I have seen these down in Galveston before. I didn't realize it until I saw this photo because they're really identifiable. But after the holidays, we recommend definitely keeping it as a house plant. Any more north in here, definitely. But even in Houston, I think it's going to do better as a house plant. When you move it outside, though, that change in light can really stress it out. So just make gradual changes to try to get it outside. If you do want to plant it in the ground here, which people have, and they have grown successfully for, a number of years. But if we get a hard freeze, it can really just do them in. In my reading, there were people that had some of these beautiful trees that grew to like 20 to 30 feet for a couple decades at least. And I think 2010, there was a really hard freeze and it really hit a lot of them. But it has been known to survive temperatures in the 30s. I don't know if that's because it was more in a protected area. Sometimes our yards can have a little bit of a like a little microclimate, and that would help. But these also were planted a lot down in Galveston. And interestingly enough, they're really salt tolerant. But again, they grew for a while, and then there was a hard freeze that came in. Ideally, they really do best between 45 degrees and 75 degrees. So I was saving this one instead of introducing it. But the fun fact here, despite the name Norfolk Island pine, or just Norfolk pine, is that it's not a pine. It's a conifer, but it's not a pine. So pines are very different. So all pines are conifers, but not all conifers are pines. Does that make sense? So I thought that was interesting. It can remove harmful volatile organic compounds. This was a study from NASA. So it shows that they cleans the air of those VOCs. Where do those come from? New furniture, clothes, cleaning products, even paints. So they're kind of all over our house. That's why it's really good to have house plants because it filters some of that air. And then these are really old plants. There's fossils back to the Mesozoic era. So there's quite a bit of history here. All right, any questions before we get to amaryllis?
Just one comment.
Mhm.
Priscilla mentioned that her grandmother has two, and they've been in pots for quite a while, and they're both about 6 feet tall. So
Yeah,
those the Norfolk Island pine will do great as houseplants.
yeah, absolutely. Definitely. Once you learn the trick. Um, Good. Okay, so on to amaryllis. It's just, I just love this presentation. There's just so many pretty pictures. So really with the amaryllis, just that sheer size of the bloom and how tall that stalk gets just really is the biggest draw. Look at that trumpet shaped flower. I mean, it's, most of those are probably easily, the diameter of my hand. Uh, as this says, that stalk can grow to 18 to 36 inches tall. Keep moist, not wet. Um, it does really well here in Houston in the ground. So this plant is probably not new to you growing outside if you're in this part of Texas. But it does so well because it's not very frost tolerant and we just don't have many frosts. Ironically, it doesn't actually also do real well in tropical areas too. So we're in this really sweet spot. Naturally, without being forced, they bloom in the spring or summer, but we force them to bloom for the holidays. And this is a really easy process. You just want to make sure that the pot is only a little bit bigger than that bulb. You don't want to put it into like a big container pot. And because that's a bulb, you want to be sure that I'd say the top third of the bulb is exposed, and it'll bloom in about 4 to 6 weeks. Generally, we don't have to get our own pot and our own soil for these. It usually comes like in a, kit, and it has everything there. If it doesn't have a kit, you can just use regular organic potting soil, maybe a little bit on the sandy side. And these blooms, there's so many different colors, between, from white all the way to that really dark maroon color that you see. So each of the blooms, it depends on the size of the bulb, but average you get about 3 to 4 blooms from it, and they can last a few days to a week. All right, let me try to. Oh, this just reminded me looking at the pots. Sometimes because they can be really top heavy, it could be useful if you have a little bit heavier of a pot, if it's like in a ceramic pot. And this one also responds well if it's inside in a window to rotate it. So that way that stalk stays upright. Wait till we get to the fun facts on this one. Okay, so I've split up the after the holidays for indoors versus outdoors just because it is, we do grow this outdoors here. So indoors, treat it just as any other house plant. This picture here, let's go over this first. You can see the difference with the bulb compared to that real flattened tuber. And then that stalk is actually called a scape. It's just a really sturdy, thick stem. But that bulb is really used for, food storage and energy to get it through the winter. Let's see. So treat as house plant, just water it like normal. As soon as that flower fades, you want to go ahead and you can cut that scape or the stalk, but leave the leaves because those leaves are what's going to provide some nutrients for the flower next year. So when you leave the leaves, then just let it kind of go dormant a little bit. Reduce a little bit of the watering through the spring and the summer. And well, actually through the spring, you can just normally treat it. I'm going to back up, make sure I say this clearly. In the spring, treat it as a house plant, kind of water it, let the leaves stay. But then going into the summer is when you would want to stop stop watering, let it go dormant, no water, no fertilizer, and then you can just store that bulb for 6 to 8 weeks. Then you can pot it up again. When you look at this picture, you can see why you don't want to plant this too deep, because that bulb can be so big anyway, and all the roots are all the way at the bottom. So you don't want those roots super far down into that soil. With these, if you do not plant them even if you don't plant them in the ground, you can rarely really get them to rebloom for Christmas, but you can try. Outside, again, they bloom in the spring or summer. Outdoors, so you want to plant it after the danger of frost. Again, what I said, even though we kind of have mild temperatures here, a new plant will be more susceptible to those temperature extremes than an established plant. So when you plant these in the ground, the next year, that first year, it probably will not bloom, but it will the following year. And of course, if you have seen these a lot, they do naturalize. So I've seen them a lot around, under trees, around trees, and they bloom. I want to say, I think it's around April. I left a question mark behind the sun. I don't know why, but you do want to plant in a good amount of sun. They do take a little bit of shade, especially since they are found a lot under trees. And then you can divide those bulbs in the fall. Great fun facts. Super fun, but bulbs can cost up to $40. Really, generally, I see them around 15 or 20. I've seen them more than 40. So yeah, those just huge, impressive blooms can, they can really cost too. If they are being grown from seed, they can take up to 6 years to bloom. So that's quite a long time if you're doing that experiment. Now, the last fact, plants that we know are not actually strictly amaryllis. We call them that, everybody calls them that, but if back on the first slide, I put the hippeastrum under it. That's the technical name for it. There is another amaryllis that's a true amaryllis. It comes from a different part of the world. They actually think they bloom before any leaves come up, and then their leaves are they're really described as kind of strappy. So what we purchase technically are not even amaryllis. They are hippeastrums, but we're not going to change that. It's just like when you go to the grocery store right now and you see yams. Those are not yams, they're sweet potatoes. It's just been widely accepted. All right, so this is our last one, Christmas cactus. This is just such a unique plant. If you don't have one, you probably know someone that has one or has one for a while. But they're just so unusual with those flat, those chain-like segments. And then with the flower on the end. Again, with the other flowering plants here, there's a pretty good diversity, in solid, and then the two colors, ranging from pink, red, yellow, white. I tried to put a bunch of pictures in here to reflect the various colors. This really grows really great as a house plant. So when you buy these, likely their lives are going to be as a house plant. We'll talk about that after the holidays. But the soil likes to be a little bit more porous. And right before the bloom too, they also like to be a little bit more dry. So even typically you only want to water when dry, like some of the other plants. If you go too dry, you've gone too far. So sometimes it just takes a little bit of practice with actually owning some of these plants. But right before the bloom, if you if you do hold off on water a little bit, it's been said it helps the bloom. I've read conflicting reports on that, so that just might be a little experiment. It does like that humidity, so a spritz would do really well. Bright indirect light, so if you don't have it by a real sunny window, you're going to get less blooms. If you have a sunny window, then you'll get more. But this is another one where you really want to avoid drafts or those heating vents. A common issue with these plants is that bud drop. That can happen because of the stress from moving it or from a cold draft. So once these plants, when the buds are really small, don't move it. Like you can move it once it starts flowering or when the buds are pretty good size. But if you move it during that stage where they're small, you're probably going to get some bud drop. These plants also flower dependent on the day length. So we'll talk about that a little bit too. So the cactus does confuse people because, it doesn't really look like a typical cactus. What we think about is, a cactus with a bunch of spines. Well, those spines are just modified leaves. This plant does not have those modified leaves. It only has the stem. And so that green part that you're looking at are not actually leaves. That is just a type of stem. So it has a stem, no leaves. And then I did label this little root up here because you'll see that sometimes it'll get some aerial roots up there. Originally, they're, in the wild, they grow from trees. So there's a lot of, let me see, I want to see what our, I'm just going to double check what the fun fact is here for this, if I'm going to talk more about it. Nope. Okay, so I'll talk right now about it. So this does come from some mountain ranges right around, oh gosh, I forget the name of it. In South America. So the reason why it likes cooler temperatures but humidity is when it's up in these mountains, you get that cool air even though it's from south, it originates south of the equator. And they usually grow from trees. So I think it's really interesting. I've even done it. We always just set it on a table or even a low stand when there may be more of an impact if we have this hanging that really represents more of how it originated, but then you can see the flowers better too. So after the holidays, again, keep as a house plant. After those blooms drop, just let it go dormant for a couple months, maybe December, January, going into February. So no water, very little water. If it looks a little peaked, you can give it a little water, but generally no water, no fertilizer. And then it'll start putting off some growth in early spring, and then you can start watering it again, adding fertilizer, and repot it if you need to. These do like to be pot bound, so you don't want to repot it every year. If you want to increase the bloom, I know people, they don't do anything to theirs and they get them to bloom. It just might not be real prolific. If you want to increase that bloom, you can take some extra steps. In the summer, there's another rest period. Let it dry out, not completely, but you're stopping that water and fertilizer again. And then in early fall, start watering again. And these also will bloom more with with increasing night with increasing darkness. So you can shorten their time frame to like 12 hours. The interesting thing though is some people have these blooming even though they don't do that. It's because temperature can also stimulate that flower growth. So if it gets around 50 degrees, that's perfect. So these are not plants in Houston that we would plant in the ground, you know, because of where they come from, and they usually hang from trees. They don't get a lot of water, not a lot of sitting water, so we don't want to plant those. And then I'm going to go back to this picture. So, you know, if you have one of these pieces of stem fall off, or you can prune it, these are easily rootable when you prune it. And if you do prune it, oops, went the wrong way. If you do prune it, that can actually encourage more growth and more blooms. Here's the video again. Okay, I'm just going to let you watch it. I'm so happy that these, so it has a lot of, those are called tepals with a T. They have like 20 or 30, so that's why it kind of always looks like it's almost like a double bloom. It's doing its little dance. So these can live 20 to 30 years, and they can definitely live longer than that. You know, I've heard stories, you know, that they've been passed down through generations. So they've been alive even more than 100 years. What you see might not actually be a Christmas cactus. So before we get to the last one, I'm going to show you what I mean. And there's a lot of stuff on the internet, so you're probably mildly familiar with this. We call all of these generally Christmas cactus, even though there's a lot more than this, but the three common ones that we have are the Thanksgiving, Christmas, and Easter, and really that's indicative of about when they bloom. So you can see this Thanksgiving, that there's those really jagged edges along the side, and then even at the top, that top part can even be like a little reddish or purple. The Christmas cactus, it's much more gentle. It still has a small little horns up at the top, unlike the Easter cactus that is really rounded around the edges. And I don't know if anybody noticed this. I did it on purpose, but because, you know, everybody calls all of these Christmas cactus, this I think is really the Easter cactus. You can see the rounding. I think the flowers are really different too. And then you can see these hairs at the edge. So even, oh, look, we have to watch the video again. And then originally where they're from, they are pollinated by hummingbirds, which makes sense, right? Look at that color. There's a deep tunnel down in there, so a hummingbird can access, you know, the nectar. And then when they're hanging from the trees, that's perfect. Around here, we probably don't see a lot of hummingbirds because the hummingbirds have actually tend to have already migrated. We get a few that stay around our area in Houston, but generally they migrate out. So that's one reason why we wouldn't see those on our flowers. So very cool. The last page is just some resources. I think I mentioned during the talk the poinsettia, the rosemary, and then Julie may have added the cyclamen one in there too. And there's just a couple more if you want to check these out. I'll try to post some of these on our Facebook page later today. So that's really it. Before, if there's any other questions, I just want to mention that the next time I'll be here is with that open forum Q&A on December 10th. So are there any other last questions? I hope everyone enjoyed all those photos and the videos.
Yeah, Brandi, we've got a couple. One is, let's see, Priscilla, I believe, added this on. Is a 12-inch depth sufficient for the bulb for the amaryllis, is what I'm assuming she's asking.
Um, with the amaryllis, I mean, you can't really say 12 inches because it depends on the size of that bulb. What you want is you want the top third of that bulb to be above the soil. So I think saying 12 inches for that definitely would not be good. So you don't need to measure it. You can literally just go off of how much of that bulb is left at that top. So you just want about the top third exposed to the air.
Okay.
Okay.
And let's see. Christine posted. This is one of her favorite bulbs, the amaryllis. We're still with the amaryllis, but she's had problems with mealybugs getting between the leaves at the neck. Sort of down there at
Mhm.
the base. Do you have any ideas or tips? Best way to get rid of the mealybugs?
Um, well, Paul, I might ask you that in a second, but for any prevention, it goes back to, that water. So just be sure that, that those conditions in your house and that when you're watering that plant that you're not over watering it. A lot of times, yes, with any of these plants you can get root rot, but the other thing that does is it's also inviting, it's weakening the defenses of those plants, and so then it will invite insects in and make it more of a an ideal habitat for them. As far as some kind of chemical treatment, Paul, do you have a recommendation? Are you familiar with anything?
I would say again, it depends on the population. If it's a very light, if you're just seeing a few, say, and on house plants, I've gone and when I've had some issues, actually, I've just taken a Q-tip,
Mm,
dipped it in some rubbing alcohol, and just touched it to that mealybug, and it will kill it off. If you've got a little bit heavier population, what I would recommend is using like a horticultural soap or an oil, because mealybugs, the crawlers, are the ones that you want to get under control, and that's the younger stage. Um, so uh, I would go depending on population. I would probably go with a horticultural soap or an oil in order to basically cover them, suffocate them, and then they will die off. All right. And then
yeah.
the last question I've got here is again on amaryllis. So that was a popular one. And this is from Claudia. And she mentioned that she neglected them a lot. She had them. I had many amaryllis in the tropics. I neglected them a lot and still had beautiful blooms. Should I plant outside?
Um, what? Well, first of all, what do you mean in the tropics?
Well,
Are you
I'm
like?
assuming maybe she lived abroad for a
Mm-hmm.
while, so she had them in the landscape down there.
Uh-huh.
So I guess she's got them now, I'm assuming, and wants
Okay.
to know if she can plant them outside.
So you can plant them outside here in Houston. I assume you mean they do grow outside. Um, I'm just thinking the time frame. It would probably be fine. It's just, again, once you wait till the chance of any kind of frost, it would just be a little bit better. Um, Last year we had no winter. I don't even think we got even a single snow. Um, so I just don't know. If we do get a little bit more of a winter, I would just, if they don't have to be in the ground, I would just go ahead and wait to plant them. But I mean, since it's still November, I think it would probably, it probably would be
Okay.
okay.
Yes, she
Sorry.
lived in she. I'm sorry. I'm scrolling down more.
Yeah.
Claudia did live in Venezuela for a while, so that's why
Okay.
she had them down there. But uh,
Okay.
I would agree with you. I wouldn't plant them now. I would wait until the spring. After that threat of frost is gone, you can plant them outside and let them establish and grow.
Yep. All right. Any more?
Yes, there was one more that I was a little. Hold on. Can you grow the Christmas cactus as a tree in Houston? I wasn't sure what George was getting at there. You might want to touch base with him because that's one of our master gardeners.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
you might.
George, do you want to ask your question? Are you there? You can unmute. Okay, as a tree or in a tree? I guess that
Well,
would be
right. The way he posted it was as a tree in Houston, and I'm if it's in a
okay.
tree, I could see that, but
Mhm.
I'm not exactly sure what he's
Yeah, so
what he's.
it definitely will not grow as a tree. That's just not how they grow. When you get older Christmas cactus, you'll see that the very base, it actually starts to get some woody material. Sometimes people want to get rid of that. They're like, oh, it's all woody. How do I get rid of it? But you don't. It just means that it's a more mature plant. So it doesn't grow as a tree. Could you grow it in a tree? If you have like a pot, kind of like how we do the staghorn ferns around here, you can probably get away with, growing it during the really mild season here in a tree. It's just since it doesn't like the hot weather, it's not going to do well, year round.
Okay, and then he said he misunderstood because I guess as you mentioned that he said you said they grow as a tree, but then he says, I misunderstood. So we've got that cleared up.
Yeah.
Shannon, you got your hand raised. Do you have a question or do you have something you
Yeah.
want to add?
I
Oh,
actually,
goodness.
I actually hit the wrong button. I meant to hit the unmute button. There's actually a couple people with their hands up, I guess, with questions in the room. I don't know if you want them to unmute their mic and ask their questions.
Yeah. Can you just
Kay,
name them off,
Okay.
Shannon?
Kay Martinek, you're
Okay.
up. Kay, you want to ask your question? How about Wendy Bohr?
All right. Well, I see
There's-
we've definitely gone an hour. Is Wendy there?
ma-
Um,
maybe they hit it by mistake when they were
yeah,
logging
Okay.
off.
Okay.
they might
Is
have
one
did
of them.
like me.
All right. Well, look, if you have any questions, you can let me know. I'm going to post some of these links on our Facebook page. And I'm just really glad you joined me today. It was pretty fun, and we'll see you next week with
No, no, not
no,
next week.
no, not next week. We're
Not
not going
next
to
week.
see you next
Yeah,
week.
we won't see you next week.
We are not going to be here. We'll see you back in 2 weeks with was that food preservation with our family community health agent. All right. Thank you so much, and have a great day.
There was, are y'all still there?
I'm here.
So the reason they couldn't ask the question is we had them muted. So they're still there. I don't know. I unmuted them. So now, Kay, are you there if you want to ask your question?
I'm here.
Oh, there you are. Hi.
Okay. Just, I was just wondering, can I pass your presentation on to some friends of mine?
So after this is done, it's going to store as a recording. We're going to upload it to our YouTube channel, and then you will be emailed the link to that. So you can go ahead and forward that link to anybody and all. One thing I didn't mention at the end of the presentation was we are going to send that link out with a survey, and we have just been really thankful for all the surveys we've gotten back, because it helps us continue to do these. So when you get that email, when you pass it along, just let them know, hey, if you watch this, just go ahead and fill out the survey with it too.
All
Okay.
right. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
And it was great.
All right. Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye.
There was one more, Brandy. Let's see if she's still in the
Okay.
room. It's M.E. Melon Dicon? Dicon?
Melinda.
Melinda?
Melinda?
Oh, is it Melody?
No, Melinda
No, it's
maybe?
Melinda.
Oh, okay.
Are you there, Melinda?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Hey, because I'm having trouble hearing you guys, but I was going to bring the point up. I think we forgot to do the fun facts on the Amaryllis.
Oh. Let
I'm
me
taking
see.
notes.
Oh no, I did them. Yeah, the
Oh,
bulbs
you
can
did? Did
cost
I miss it?
$40. Yeah. So you could just go back and check it out when you get the recording. Yep.
I
I'm
will.
glad you liked them.
Yes, I have Amaryllis. Mine are all outside, and they bloom like all summer. They just go crazy. But now my lantana is like smothering them, so I have to transplant them here pretty shortly here. So
Oh.
I cut all my lantana back. I'm gonna have to make a change.
Well, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you. I enjoyed it very much.
All right.
That's it for the hand raises.
Okay. Well, thanks everyone. We're going to go ahead and call it the day, and you will get this as a link with the survey. Thank you so much. Have a great Thanksgiving next week.